Hello, my name is David Torres and this is my final project, Artist Life Story of Edvard Munch. Edvard Munch was born on the 12th of December in 1863 in Lathon, Norway, the son of Dr. Christian Munch and his wife Laura. He had three sisters, Sophie, Laura and Inga, and a brother called Andreas. But family life was very difficult for Edvard because in 1888, at the age of 5, Munch's mother died of tuberculosis. His father sank into a deep depression, so his wife, sister Karen, took over the running and management of the house. But the tragedy was compounded when in 1877 Munch's sister Sophie also died of tuberculosis. She was 50 years old. He was just 14. If that wasn't enough, his younger sister Laura had a mental issues in her teenage years and spent a large part of their life institutionalized in a mental hospital. It is not surprising that sicknesses and death left a permanent mark on Munch's childhood, particularly the death of his sister Sophie, whose suffering he later expressed in his painting The Sick Child. These family issues contribute to Munch's own on and off struggles with mental illnesses and alcoholism, as well as providing the inspiration for some of the most influential paintings. Munch left school at the age of 16 and decided to study engineering, but the following year quit his studies after deciding he wanted to become a painter. In early 1881, he began to attend the Christiania Drawing Academy and also sold his first two paintings. A couple of years later, he rented a studio in Christiania, known as Oslo, with 6 other art students. They were lucky enough to receive support and instruction from the naturalist painter and illustrator Christian Krohg. Initially, Munch's work was heavily influenced by Krohg's naturalist painting. Munch exhibited at Oslo Tomb Exhibition for the first time in 1883 and in 1885 showed work at the Antwerp War Exhibition. During this period, he worked on three major paintings: The Day After, Puberty, and The Sick Child. It was also around this time he had his first true relationship with Millie Trallow, the wife of a distant cousin. He was infatuated with her, but she ended the relationship abruptly after 2 years, leaving him tormented and desolate. Nevertheless, in 1886, Munch showed several paintings including The Sick Child at the Oslo Tomb Exhibition, and the public were horrified. It is difficult to understand now why the painting provoked such a violent and angry response. When it was shown today, the subject seems quite conventional, but notice the use of complementary colors, the, the red hair glazing with the greens of the dress. In most of Munch's paintings, he abandons the use of localized colors and uses primary and complementary colors instead because the color combinations have a much greater expression and expressive power. What perhaps is more significant is that Munch became increasingly reluctant to paint realistic backgrounds, so his figures seem to be in some indeterminate space. This is interesting because it makes you focus more on the psychology, the thoughts and emotions of the figures and less on the particular situation. Later in 1889, Munch had his first solo exhibition in Oslo. Munch had his first solo exhibition in Oslo. It was very successful and led to Munch being offered a state grant to study drawing with Lacune Bernard in Paris, but shortly after arriving in France, Munch's father died and his grief pushed him into a deep depression and heavy drinking, so much so he was unable to paint for months. However, In 1890, he moved back to Oslo and painted a spring day on Karl Johan Street. This was very much influenced by Seurat's pointillist neo-impressionist style, but you'll notice his impatience with Seurat's scientific pointless approach, as the figures in the middle are not painted in the style. After a brief spell in his convalescing from a bout of rheumatic fever, Munch returned to Paris and took a room at 49 Rue Lafayette, and there in May 1891 he painted another of his impressionist works, Rue Lafayette. Munch later described the work as a brief revival of my impressionist periods. It's probably a review from the balcony of Munch room. In 1892, Munch returned home to Norway and spent the summer in Asgardstrand painting. Later that year, at the end of October, he exhibited 55 paintings in Berlin, but was shocked by the antagonistic reception he received from both the public and the press, who couldn't even spell his name right, referred to him as a Blunch, not Munch. As a result, just a week closed. After just a week closed, but it was not all bad, because the news of the scandal of the exhibition closing early led to the exhibition going on tour to Cologne, Dusseldorf, and surprisingly it was back to Berlin by the end of the year with a much better reception. For the next year or so, Munch stayed in Berlin. He managed to sell enough paintings to scrape a living while working on what would become his most famous series of painting, The Frieze of Life. Was a series of paintings which were very much influenced by his own experience. The painting explored life, love, and death that would occupy Munch for many years. It was during his year 1893 he created his most famous painting, The Scream, which is an integral part of his Frieze of Life. There are over 50 versions of the Scream, painting and prints other than the paintings that is on display in the National Gallery in Oslo. The Scream represents and deals with the fear and loneliness of a man in a natural setting. In Munch's diary there is an entry which describes the event on which the painting is based. During the next couple of years, he continued to work on the Frieze of Life, completing several important paintings. In this work, The Ashes, where we can see the breakdown of a love affair, but the painting also explores the psychology of the moment. The figures appear to be suspended in eloquent gestures which are difficult to put into words, yet we understand them perfectly. In other words, Melancholy explores jealousy, a theme much often studied in the Bohemian Society of Oslo in the 1890s. Free love was often advocates polygamous relationships were created, sometimes resulting in an intense jealousy. This is reflected in this painting. Note the two figures on the background about to embark on a short trip together to a deserted island. Contrast them with the third figure in the foreground. In the painting The Deathbed, notice the patient is no longer the focal point of the painting. Instead of the focus moved to the hands and the head of the family at his bedside. They are all linked together in a grief by the huge black shadow. It may be significant that Munch's younger brother Andreas died of pneumonia. The year before this year, Deathbed painting was produced. This painting of death formed the final part of the Frieze of Life. This series of painting was first exhibited under the name of The Frieze of Life in Berlin in 1902, but in later shows Leipzig, Oslo, and Prague. Munch included new paintings in 1898. Munch met a woman who would become his cruel muse. Tula Larsen was the wealthy daughter of one of Oslo's leading wine merchants. From the very start, she persuaded him aggressively, and the relationship began much against his will. He fled to Berlin and Paris, but she pursued him. He had refused to meet her, but always seemed to give in. In fact, he memorized the relationship in this painting, The Dance of Life. On the left we see an innocent woman in white looking forward to life. In the middle, a sensual woman dancing with the man, her red dress almost encircling him, and the and Wish Woman in Black on the right. All the trees resemble Tula Larsen, and the girls dancing in the background may also resemble her too. The man in the foreground appears to be Munch. Tula Larsen longed to marry Munch, but he once wrote the touch of their narrow, clammy lips was like the kiss of a corpse. Eventually though, in 1902, after Munch had lost their pre-marriage document, he escaped in Italy. They Berlin where despite drinking heavily he finished the freeze of life, but the saga was not over. After disappearing for a year, Tula Larsen suddenly reappeared claiming her break from Munch had left her. Suicidal and depressed, Munch reluctantly agreed to see her, but there was an argument, which somehow resulted in Munch shooting himself. He actually just lost her tip of his finger, which he later described as a monstrosity that everyone stared at, as a result of never showing his hand in public or painting. Again always ensuring he wore gloves. A few months after the incident, Tula Larsen married another artist. In 1904, Munch exhibited with the Berlin and Venice Succession. The following year, he spent the winter in Germany to calm his nerves and combat his drinking, but the autumn of 1908, Munch collapsed in Copenhagen. He was persuaded to check himself into a private sanatorium of the outskirts of the city because he was hallucinating and was partially paralyzed down his left side. After 6 months in the hospital, his drinking reduced and he regained most of the mental stability. He was keen to get back to painting, but he was now alone. The tumultuous life he had led was now behind him, and a new phase of isolation beginning his life as a result after 1908. A lot of his work doesn't seem to have the same poignancy, drama, and physiological impact as the painting completed before that date. Munch returned to Norway in 1909 and rented a house in Krogen where he began to work on the murals for the Great Hall of Oslo University, which he completed around 1916. The centerpiece of the installation was the painting The Sun. It is a massive canvas more than 7 meters wide. The sun is depicted as all-pervasive, shining from the heavens onto the land, sea, its rise providing the sources of all life. Munch was nearly 60 in 1921 when he was commissioned to paint a frieze of 12 large paintings for the Friar chocolate factories in by the factory's founder Johann Frauenholz. The paintings were installed in the women's canteen in 1923. Frauenholz had decided that for the female workers only the best was good enough, so he got Norway's greatest painter, Munch, to decorate their canteen with women as the main character. The paintings depict everyday scenes from the resort towns on Norway East Coast. Munch received the equivalent of 10,000 euros for his work. In 1916, Munch bought a former plant in Norset called Eichenstein on the outside of Oslo. He lived at Eichli for the next 28 years until his death. The estate consisted in 11 acres of 5 apple trees, bushes and shrubs, and several large outdoor studios. In 1919 he caught the Spanish flu, but survived, and commissioned an architect to build him yet another much larger studio. During his construction, many of the construction workers became the subject of a number of his paintings. During the early 1930s, paintings became more difficult because Munch contracted an ADC, but in 1933, on occasion of his 7th birthday, he was awarded the Grand Cross of the Order of St. Olaf, and 3 years later saw his first exhibition in England. 1937 saw the Nazis label 82 of Munch's paintings as degenerate and removed them from exhibition in Germany. They were eventually repatriated to Norway where they were auctioned off. German forces invaded Norway in 1940, but Munch refused to have anything to do with it. Locking himself away at Eckley, he embarked on a number of unflinchingly revealing self-portraits which explored themes for an old man facing the prospect of death. In the months before he died, Munch painted a self-portrait between the clock and a bed. Ironically, he looks like a man who has held himself back from the dance of life. He appears awkwardly squashed between the grandfather clock and the bed and looking as though he shouldn't be occupying the space. On the 12th December 1943, tributes poured in his 80th birthday, but he was suffering from a cerebral cold, which he failed to recover from. Munch died peacefully in his sleep on the 23rd of January in 1944. In his will he left his entire estate to the city of Oslo. His bequest consisted of 1,150 paintings, 7,000 prints, 4,500 watercolors, and drawing a 13 sculpture, as well as writing and literary notes. The collection formed the basis of the Edvard Munch Museum, which opens in Oslo in 1963 to celebrate the centenary birth. Thank you.